Here is the pure narration extracted from your script, with all production notes and visual instructions removed. On August 18, 2026, MTV quietly dropped a list of names. Buried inside it was a fact that, on the surface, looks like an outright triumph. Lisa, the Thai-born global icon of Blackpink, had just become the most nominated K-pop soloist in the history of the MTV Video Music Awards. For nominations, 10 career nods total. A new record. The headlines wrote themselves. Lisa makes history. K-pop's reigning global export. Case closed, right? Not quite. Because if you actually sit with the numbers, really sit with them, something doesn't add up. Madonna, a legacy artist deep into her 5th decade of fame, pulled in 11 nominations this year. Taylor Swift landed 9. Lisa, arguably the single most powerful crossover force to come out of Asia in the last 5 years, landed 4. Fewer than Bruno Mars. Fewer than Pink Pantheress. Tied in terms of category weight, with names most casual viewers couldn't pick out of a lineup. So here's the question almost nobody in entertainment press is actually asking out loud. Is this record-breaking moment a pure reflection of Lisa's cultural dominance? Or is it a number shaped by a category system, a voting structure, and a business relationship most fans never think to question? Stick with us, because by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how the VMAs decide who gets to be called a star. And what Lisa's real business play, the one hiding just behind the glamour, actually reveals about where the global music industry is headed next. Let's start with the machine itself. To understand what Lisa's 4 nominations actually mean, you first have to understand the room she's competing in, and more importantly, the rules of that room. In 2019, MTV introduced a brand new award, Best K-pop. On paper, it looked like recognition, a dedicated stage for a genre that was, at the time, still fighting for mainstream legitimacy in the West. BTS had just cracked the Billboard Hot 100 Top 10. Blackpink was about to headline Coachella. K-pop wasn't a niche anymore. It was a commercial force, and MTV wanted in. But here's the part that rarely gets said out loud on camera. Creating a separate lane for K-pop also meant, functionally, building a wall. Once a category exists specifically to hold an entire genre, artists inside that genre become easier to nominate there, and easier to leave out of the categories that actually move the needle. Video of the Year, Artist of the Year, Song of the Year. The categories that shape industry-wide cultural relevance, not just performance within a devoted fandom. This isn't a fringe theory. It's a critique that has followed the Best K-pop category since it was created. That it functions less like a spotlight and more like a container. A place where extraordinary global performers get celebrated without ever being measured, on the same stage, against Madonna, Taylor Swift, or Bruno Mars in the categories that actually define who the industry considers a generational force. Now look at Lisa's 2026 nominations again through that lens. Best Pop, Best K-pop, Best Cinematography, Best Editing. 2 of those 4 are genre and craft categories, legitimate, hard-earned recognition for the visual and technical execution of Dream, her Kentaro Sakaguchi collaboration off her debut full-length album, Alter Ego. Real nominations, real achievement. But notice what's missing: no Video of the Year, no Artist of the Year, no Song of the Year. The categories where the industry decides who gets talked about as a generational force, not just an excellent genre performer. Compare that to Madonna's 11 nominations, which include Video of the Year and Artist of the Year for Confessions 2, the film. Or Taylor Swift's 9, anchored by The Fate of Ophelia, competing in the night's marquee categories. Those aren't just bigger numbers. They're numbers built from a different kind of access. And this isn't a one-year anomaly. Rewind to 2025. Rose, Lisa's own bandmate, landed 8 VMA nominations off a single song, APT. Her Bruno Mars collaboration, including Video of the Year and Song of the Year. That same year, BTS member J-Hope's critically acclaimed Mona Lisa was shut out of nominations entirely, despite widespread expectation it would land multiple nods. The online backlash was immediate and loud. Because if the nomination process were a pure meritocracy, how does a song with that level of critical and commercial success walk away with zero recognition? the uncomfortable answer the industry rarely says out loud. Award nominations aren't a scoreboard. They're a negotiation between labels and networks, between commercial value and cultural narrative, between what generates ratings and what generates goodwill with a very specific voting demographic. Which brings us to the real mechanism behind these numbers, the one MTV would probably rather you not think too hard about. The voting system itself. VMA nominees are selected by an internal industry committee, but winners are decided by online fan voting, including something MTV calls Power Hour, specific windows where votes count double. And nobody mobilizes an army for a Power Hour quite like a K-pop fandom. This is the paradox sitting at the center of Lisa's 4 nominations. The same fandom siloed category structure that makes K-pop artists slightly less likely to be nominated in the industry's top-tier categories is exactly the infrastructure that makes them nearly unbeatable once they are nominated anywhere. Lisa's fanbase, and Blackpink's collective fandom, represents one of the most organized, most digitally coordinated voting blocks in awards show history. MTV knows this. And that single fact is about to become very important in Chapter 4, when we talk about why Lisa's nominations might matter more to MTV's bottom line than to her artistic legacy. But first, we need to talk about the biggest gamble of Lisa's career, the one that made these 4 nominations possible in the first place. To really understand Lisa's VMA story, you have to go back to December 2023, to a decision that had nothing to do with music and everything to do with control. For years, Lisa's solo career existed inside the machinery of YG Entertainment, the powerhouse Korean agency that built Blackpink from the ground up. But at the end of 2023, YG confirmed something significant. While Blackpink's group contract was renewed, the members' individual solo contracts were not. Lisa, along with Jennie, Jisoo and Rose, walked away from YG's control over their solo careers, even as they stayed bound together as a group. For most idols, a split like that from a home agency would be a crisis. For Lisa, it became an opening. In February 2024, she made her move and founded her own company, LLOUD. About a year later, Lisa described that decision in strikingly candid terms, calling it a big risk, something she took on because she wanted a team built entirely around her own vision instead of folded into a larger roster. Read between the lines and it's not hard to hear what she's really saying. That inside the traditional K-pop machine, even a global superstar can end up as one priority among many. LLOUD was her answer to that. A company of one, built by one, for one artist's long-term global ambitions. 2 months after founding LLOUD, Lisa made her real power move. In April 2024, LLOUD announced a partnership with RCA Records, a major Sony music label. And buried in that press release was a detail industry insiders immediately flagged as extraordinary. Under the deal, Lisa would retain full ownership of her own master recordings. If you don't work in the music business, that might sound like a technicality. It is not. Master recording ownership is one of the most fought-over assets in the entire industry. The very thing behind one of the most famous artist versus label battles in modern pop history. When Taylor Swift lost the rights to her own early catalog and spent years re-recording her albums just to regain control of her own work. Masters mean long-term royalties, licensing power, leverage in every future negotiation. In the most literal sense, they are ownership of an artist's own legacy. For a major label to hand a new solo artist, even one as famous as Lisa, that level of ownership on a debut solo deal is not standard practice. It's a signal. RCA wasn't signing Lisa as just another artist on their roster. They were signing her as a business partner, a brand, an entity they arguably needed as much as she needed them. What did that bet actually cost her, though? Because independence always comes with a price tag. Rockstar, released in June 2024, was LLOUD's first release under the RCA partnership. And it landed her right back at the VMAs that year with 4 nominations. The exact same number she'd earn again in 2026. Momentum was real, but so was the pressure of building an entire creative and business infrastructure from scratch, without the decades-deep machinery of an agency like YG behind her. That pressure showed up publicly in 2025, when Lisa released Alter Ego, her debut full-length solo album. It was a commercial milestone, but critically it was polarizing. Several outlets, including Pitchfork, published sharply critical reviews arguing the record didn't fully deliver on Lisa's evident star power. Fans were split too, some defending it as a bold artistic statement, others openly frustrated that in trying to prove she could stand entirely on her own, Lisa had lost some of the sharper, more distinct identity that made earlier solo singles like La Lisa and Money so instantly iconic. This is the part of the story most puff pieces skip entirely. Lisa didn't walk into 2026 with 4 VMA nominations because everything about her independent era has gone smoothly. She walked in after absorbing real criticism, real skepticism, and a genuinely mixed critical reception to her most ambitious project yet, and still came out the other side as the most nominated K-pop soloist in VMA history. Whatever you think of Alter Ego as an album, the business machine underneath it is, undeniably, working. But here's the open loop we're leaving you with heading into the next chapter. If the ownership structure is that unusual, and the critical reception was that mixed, why did RCA and MTV both still treat Lisa like one of the most bankable names of the year? What is she actually offering them that the music alone doesn't explain? That answer runs straight through her own bandmates, a chart dynamic nobody in Blackpink will publicly frame as a competition, and a business calculation on MTV's part that has almost nothing to do with music at all. We'll get into all of it right after this.